You just saw the perfect house that you're already envisioning your life in, and you're ready to put an offer on it. What if you've never presented an offer on a home? How do you stand out against the competition? What's the right offer price? How much due diligence are you supposed to put down? What about earnest money, concessions, appraisal contingencies? It's a world of strategy when you step into presenting an offer. And in this episode, we're going to break all of that down in a deep dive on what you need to know before presenting. My name is Trevor Burris with the Trev and Jess team of Love It Properties, and I've helped a ton of folks write successful offers to get them into great homes. In this next episode of our home buying guide in North Carolina, we're going to break down exactly what it takes to make you successful and also how you can stay safe when presenting offers. So, let's get into it. I'm going to outline this conversation with the big terms that we use in an offer to purchase so that you can better understand how an offer works. Here in this state, the real estate law incorporates these main terms as a standard for our real estate contracts. They aren't all required, but they are standard legal terms that help facilitate negotiations in home sales. They are offer price, due diligence fee and period, earnest money, contract period, personal items, lending disclosure, contingency disclosure, seller concessions, and addendums. There are many other disclosure items and terms in the contract, but they are minor compared to these big terms that really matter most to sellers. The standard offer to purchase is a pretty large document, and they definitely change it regularly to keep up with market trends. But these important terms I mentioned are going to frame up our discussion today. This is going to be a deep dive into each of these terms, so feel free if you know about some of these already to scan ahead in the chapters to find the terms that you are less familiar with. Term number one is offer price. This is the big kahuna. If this one is not right, then a lot of the other terms don't really matter. But the word on the street may not be all you need to know in order to pick an accurate and successful offer price. Just because the public says you have to offer over asking price does not mean that's always justified. Sellers can price anywhere they want, low, high, or right at where they expect to sell. In any offer situation, a good real estate agent will do their homework to give you an accurate perspective of where they think it might appraise. This is by far the most important thing you need to know before deciding on an offer price. If you have a good idea on the comparable sales in the area, then this will help you kind of untangle what the seller's strategy is and where they would like to see offers land. If it's priced low, this data will help you have an idea as to how far you can stretch above their asking price and still be within an appraisal range. If it's priced high, then there's a chance you can offer below their asking price and still be seen as competitive. In a hyper-competitive time of the market, like we often see in the spring in North Carolina, you may have to stretch your offer even higher than what you think it might appraise for in order to edge out the competition. But this is where you lean on your agent to tell you what will win, and also to know what risk you may be stepping into with your offer price. The second term of an offer that we're going to discuss today is the due diligence fee and period. If I had to pick the second most important term in a contract, this is it. Due diligence is a unique feature of North Carolina contracts that is not standard in a lot of other states. It's similar in function to an inspection period or a contingency period in which you have a right to investigate the property and decide if you want to move forward with the contract. At this point, the seller is not allowed to sell it to anyone else. They are under contract with you, and therefore you have the only right to investigate the property. However, in North Carolina, this period is most often accompanied by a fee. This is what we call the due diligence fee. It is due and payable the moment the contract is signed and delivered back to the offering party, and it must be paid within 24 hours, and it's paid directly to the seller. In a non-competitive market, it just serves as a little skin in the game, tying you to the contract. If you decide to back out, it stays with the seller. If you go all the way to closing, it comes back to you as a credit. However, in a highly competitive market, this due diligence fee is wielded as a major competitive muscle to help you show commitment that some of the other buyers aren't willing to put on the line. In a hypermarket like we saw in spring of 2022, this due diligence is communicating to the seller that you aren't backing out for any reason. This is strategy at its finest, because if you push out the highest due diligence fee, you're communicating to the seller that you are more committed than any other offer at the table. However, the seller now has that amount of leverage over you, and they know you aren't going anywhere for less than that amount of money. I've seen due diligence fees of $50,000, $75,000, and $100,000. That's a huge commitment fee. In these high due diligence situations, you are relinquishing every right to negotiate on an appraisal discrepancy or for repairs. But on the flip side, if it's not as competitive of a contract situation, then you could play with the amount of this due diligence fee to give yourself more ability on the other side of contract to negotiate if anything is found. Either way, this fee is very important in our North Carolina contracts. The next term is earnest money. This used to be the only type of deposit that was used in our contracts. And similarly to due diligence, it is a cash deposit that secures you to the offer. However, the big difference between this and due diligence is that this deposit is held in escrow by an attorney or a licensed escrow agent. It is not considered to be any liquidated damages to the contract unless you decide to terminate after the due diligence period is over. Today, I see these most often used for longer contracts. But typically, if the contract is 30 to 45 days, the listing agent is going to be most concerned about seeing high due diligence and not concerned at all about earnest money. So this term in general is less important than the due diligence fee. The next term is the contract period. If I had to pick a third most important term in the contract, this would be it. The contract period, or the settlement date as it's referred to in the contract, defines how long you will take in order to investigate the property and prepare to purchase it. Sellers in most situations want this date to be as soon as possible because they don't get paid completely until the sale closes. Keeping this as short as possible is key to a competitive offer. Most lenders can close on a home within 30 to 45 days. Many, though, can do it in as little as 14 to 21 days. This is where knowing your lender's capabilities in advance is a huge competitive edge. If you are purchasing with cash, then you can really offer a very short contract period because there are no lending contingencies or appraisals that need to be performed in order to purchase the property. Often a cash purchase with a short contract can be even more competitive to a seller than a high offer price if the seller needs to move quickly. But I wouldn't jump to conclusions and say cash is always king. We'll talk about that in a later step. The next term we'll talk about is personal items. In North Carolina, some items are considered fixtures and don't need to be requested with a contract, like blinds that are installed, or a dishwasher, or a stove. However, there are often personal items that get conveyed at no cost with the contract, and these can create some negotiation standoffs. The most common items to request are a fridge, a washer, and a dryer. However, I've seen a lot of items get requested, like hot tubs, furniture, and other personal items. Some folks even write in animals to the contract, like chickens or livestock. This is all part of the negotiation. So if the seller really doesn't want a certain personal item to convey, this is worth finding out in advance so that you don't create any barrier for yourself in a competitive situation. The next term is the lending disclosure. There is a part in the contract in which you are required to share what type of lending you will be using to purchase the property, or if you can purchase with cash. This is important information to the seller so that they can see your capability of purchasing the home. Of course, they don't just take your word for it. You're going to need to provide them with some verification from a lender that's either in the form of a pre-qualification, pre-approval, or a bank statement. This is where a cash purchase will always have an edge over financing because it isn't dependent upon appraisals or jobs. However, cash is not always king. In my experience, sellers most often choose the highest offer price, even if a loan is attached. So although cash is an advantage, it also has to be competitive in its offer price and other terms. Next is the contingency disclosure. In North Carolina, you're required to disclose if you need to sell a property in order to purchase this one. This is super important to the seller to know because it creates an additional contingency in order to complete the sale. If your offer is contingent and it gets stacked up against a bunch of other offers that are non-contingent, you better believe that's going to be a strike against yours. However, if you offer more aggressively than any other offer at the table, often a seller will still look your way and consider your offer seriously. The next term is seller concessions. In the contract, you can request the seller to cover part of your loan costs, closing costs, or repairs. This comes from the seller's proceeds and is paid to you at closing. It's super important that if you're getting a loan, that you discuss with your lender prior to requesting these concessions what your limit for requesting is. They typically have a top amount that you can't exceed, but there are some clever ways to utilize extra concessions if you have been able to negotiate them. I won't get into that in this episode, but hopefully we'll release some other episodes later talking about that exact topic. Effectively, this is going to be seen as the seller making this much less on their home sale. So be careful not to employ this in a highly competitive situation, as this may push you out of the running. However, there are still a lot of situations out there where you can request concessions and the seller will absolutely entertain that. And the last term that we'll discuss today is addendums. There are many of these that are approved for our contracts in North Carolina that can be attached to the contract. Some of the most commonly used are the seller possession after closing, the additional provisions addendum, and there are many others that are drafted by attorneys in our state. An addendum can be used to define certain restrictions, like a deadline to respond to an offer, establish expected repairs prior to agreeing on a contract, and even to modify a contract to include additional terms. The most creative uses of these are often employed in a hyper-competitive situation. One of the most common effectively promises that in the event of an appraisal discrepancy, the buyer takes on all responsibility for any gap. They also can state that no concession or repairs will be requested. These particular ones give the seller peace of mind so that they know that the sale will be as is and they won't have to sacrifice any concession. But in the right situation, they can also protect the buyer. Some detail that even the due diligence fee will be returned if the property does not appraise or if certain items are found during an inspection. Others obligate the seller to lower their purchase price to the appraised value in the event of an appraisal discrepancy. There are a myriad of uses for them, so lean on your agent to know exactly which to use in each situation. All of these terms that we just discussed define what an offer is, and they also either make or break your offer. It's also important to note that in North Carolina, any other party's terms are not allowed to be disclosed without the permission of that party. So in practice, a multiple offer situation here is a bit like a blind auction. You present your best terms and hope that the seller likes yours better than the others. They can counter, they can decline, or they can accept your terms. If they counter, you aren't obligated to accept the terms that they extend to you, and you can counter again until you come to an agreement. Once both parties agree and sign, and the acceptance of terms is conveyed back to the offering or countering party, then you are under contract. And this is where our next episode will take us as we jump into the very next step following contract, which is the due diligence period. Well, that's it for offers. Thanks for joining us, guys, on this deep dive into the terms of a contract. I hope this information was super helpful to your buying process. If it was, please hit that subscribe button below to help me reach even more buyers with this awesome educational information. If you have any additional questions, my information is in the description below. There's also a link there that you could schedule a chat with me directly. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again next week.